I don't even know. Oh, it's 100 Thieves. Kremp. That's so funny.
Hmm?
Kremp losses.
Oh.
Crumplosis. Bees over OpTic and more from this weekend CDL matches, episode 205. Yep. Alright, why can't Twitch load for me? That's not good. Now we're good. Alright, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yep, we're good there. Good on YouTube too.
You ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 205 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the return of the Call of Duty League after a long break. Maybe not as long as we thought last year's was, but after 4 or 5 weeks, the CDL is back, and I think we got some pretty surprising results in the first week back in the CDL. Certainly the pick'em would indicate so. I think we have quite a bit to talk about before we get to any of that. However, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, first week back and first official week of 2026 CDL matches, and there were definitely some very surprising results, and especially factoring in those who listened last episode. We were talking about, I mean, just we're gonna get to eventually, like Carolina. We were like, I don't know if Carolina's gonna have much of a honeymoon phase or if anything like that's gonna matter. Well, it did end up mattering, and Vancouver, the other team that was proactive in making a change, they were able to not only get their first map win, but their first series win too. So a lot of surprising results. Can't wait to break it all down and ready to hop right in.
Yeah, so the first match of the week on Friday, January 9th, was the only match that we disagreed on when we did the pick'em. It was G2 Minnesota versus the Riyadh Falcons. You went with the Falcons, I went with G2, and this was a really competitive, hard-fought back-and-forth series. It ends up going Riyadh's way 3-2, but this was a 16-point hard point win for G2 in the first hard point, a 1-point a 250 to 249 hard point win for G2 in the second hard point, and then we get some really competitive S&Ds, a 2-1 overload win for the Falcons, but it comes down to Colossus S&D, and Celium just goes crazy, 11 kills, Falcons win 6-3, and they end up winning this series, and obviously it's a big win for the Falcons, who had a really great bounce back week before the break. G2, however, this loss, and we'll talk about the second match of the week as well, but this was, a pretty tough loss for them. Overall thoughts on the first match of this week?
Yeah, started out with pretty good banger, and I think that's what I was kind of teasing up last week when we were doing our predictions. I felt like these were two teams that especially factoring in uh, G2's preseason performances, they both felt like two middle of the pack teams, and this was going to be a match that kind of allowed us to gauge where both teams sat, like facing each other and quote unquote other middle of the pack teams. And I feel like that showed in the result, like a lot of close maps. It comes down to a game five, like you said. Individual maps, like the hard points, were decided by less than 20 points overall, like 16 points and 1 point. One score difference in the overload, and then 6-4 and 6-3 in the searches. So very close series. I think that does mean, despite it being a loss for G2, that they still are, you know, pretty close, all things considered, to Falcons. I think that means for Falcons as well that it's more of what we've come to expect from them so far, is that they struggled early on against the top, quote unquote, top teams, and so far they have been able to beat the other teams that aren't in that quote unquote top. So, um, yeah, I think the big thing off the rip was we got our first taste of Kremp which has been a name going around after today's events, and we'll get to that later. But Kremp opened the weekend with a 41 bomb on Colossus hardpoint, using the MPC, which is the last sub that you unlock in Black Ops 7, and there was a lot of discussion around it afterwards,
Yep.
which I was a little surprised by because even head Ego Chall correspondent Tremy was messaging me like, I can't believe the NPC is being allowed because it's banned from all the tournament sites and stuff. And I went back through our notes. There were two other instances um, where a different SMG was used, and I noted them down in our notes. So let me just scroll back in my message with Trem. I know one was Gwyn and one was Envoy. So I think it was Gwyn using the NPC. I couldn't have messaged Trem that long ago. These are December messages. Why can't I find it? Oh, here it is. So yeah, Gwen used the NPC on Colossus against Toronto on December 12th, and Envoy used the Razor on Colossus against Vancouver on December 6th. So those are two instances I noted down where we saw, not the Dravik, which has been the basically the do-it-all SMG, being pulled out, and this seemed to be, I don't know what the difference was here. Maybe just people weren't paying as much attention to those early matches and just let it slip under the rug a little bit. But Kremp opened some eyes early on with this performance, and the gun was officially GA'd or reportedly allegedly GA'd later Friday night, and then we did see it a couple more times throughout the weekend, even after that. So not really sure what the deal is there. Maybe it seemingly I think Parasite had a tweet about it, basically explaining that it's like a super close quarters SMG, which is like what you want an what you would imagine a good SMG would be like. A good SMG, a quote unquote good SMG, shouldn't be
A
three,
long
four
range
bulleting
gun.
someone across the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, like and I think that's the thing, which is a little surprising in this instance, where like this gun is apparently seemingly only super good close up, and it's still being GA'd. So I don't know what the deal is there, and maybe it's the first domino to fall after Slasher's retirement. Now Slasher's not in there to hold court and take care of the GA, so all chaos is breaking loose. But yeah, on a serious note, I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on that in the weeks to come. Like I said, it was used on uh, other maps after that, notably Shoddy, noticeably. Shotzi used it and struggled with it in their match to start the weekend. So it was getting a lot of course, obviously, when OpTic's involved, it
Yeah.
gets more attention and stuff too. So, not sure what the end result from the MPC situation will be. Seems like it's going to be GA going forward, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, overall, was pleasantly surprised by Celium in the S&Ds. I shouldn't say surprised, but was happy to see him dropping 22 kills and two S&Ds. Like that's kind of something that again falls under the radar a little bit with Cell. Like, people see Celium and they think of him being like that guy who always just drops high KD numbers and respawns and stuff. They forget he was like a bit of an S&D kid coming up into the scene and everything like that. So it's good to see him performing well in Search. It is interesting to me though that like we see another Neslo performance here from Falcons and G2. Not winning searches on a team with Skies. That's something we can talk more about for Minnesota coming up too, but it is another game 5 situation for Minnesota. But for Falcons, like, a team with Pred, and it's not to say Pred is bad at S&D or anything like that, but you think of a Pred team, like he is more well known for just being uber aggressive, slaying, all that stuff. and I guess some of his best teams were when he had accuracy and the Iceman clutching up.
Hmm.
So it's not like he's a bad S&D player or been on bad S&D teams, but it's just not when I think of a team with Celium and Pred on it, I'm more thinking of them like dropping big numbers in the respawns and that being their path to victory than S&D. But we see it here; they're able to get it done with the 2-3-5. So that'll be something to keep an eye on for Falcons going forward too. Is whether this trend continues or if they are able to get some hard points here.
I want to have like a longer conversation about the NPC because because there were no big teams that played on Friday. I think a lot of the attention got turned to the GA part of the conversation, especially after the matches, because Craze in his post match interview even said, that was the second match of the day, and then like right afterwards it gets GA'd, but he literally said in his post match interview, I think it's going to get GA'd because the gun's kind of crazy, which I mean, I'm not disputing that fact. I don't want to say like the players don't know what they're doing or whatever, but I think, and we've talked about this a lot before, they have their interest in mind. They don't have the best interest of necessarily the competitive scene or the community or the viewing experience, which is something that the league itself should have in mind. So the players are really just looking out for themselves, and I can't blame them in that regard. But like you said, we saw Shotzi. He dropped like a point 0.6 with this gun later in the week. And if you're telling me that this is like a do-it-all gun, this is the best gun in the game, and that this deserves to be GA'd, and then a former MVP, one of the best players in Call of Duty history, drops a point 0.6 with it, I don't think that really matches up. I don't know what you think about that, because to me, I mean, obviously it's good. I'm not saying it's not a good gun, but is it so much better than the Dravik that like, why isn't the Dravik up for debate at that point where people are like, this is a really good gun and it was the first gun that people kind of gravitated to? Does that not really make sense to think about GAing that gun if that's the gun everybody uses? And some guys can drop 35, 40 kills with that gun and it not be the NPC. I don't follow that logic that the pros are using to GA this gun in particular.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a head scratcher to me too because um, it's being compared to the MSMC and like I think that's like the iron sights don't match up, but that's what like I think the NPC is supposed to be a variant of the
It
MSMC
looks
or
a little bit
something.
like it. That and like the
Yeah.
MP7 from Black Ops 2.
Um, so but like when I think of the description again sticking with Black Ops 2, like a sub that's good close range, not good much beyond that would be like the Scorpion, right? Like
Yeah.
the MSMC, I'm thinking of that all around. The MSMC is more like the Dravik in this game as opposed to the NPC, and the
Hmm.
NPC, at least in my head based on the description, would be that I haven't used the NPC at all in multiplayer. I've used it in zombies, and in zombies it's fine, but I haven't used it at all in multiplayer, so I can't really speak more beyond that in terms of what the deal is for the GAs. I will say on the Shotzi front that you were saying it's not like he was using the NPC
Hmm.
for the entire series or even the entire maps where he was struggling a little bit to start this weekend. Um, but it was I think that's even there was a point in the LAT match today where Abizi was using the Razor and I was watching the Scump watch party and they were like, yeah, you got to put that thing away, pull out the Dravik, and then he does, and Abizi starts to seemingly find a little bit more kills. So maybe it's a case of like there has to be something going on where these players are trying to innovate a little bit, which I'm a huge fan of. I've been vocal about that always. I like when more guns are involved in the meta, and that probably goes back to my Fizzerp fandom a little bit. Always trying to innovate a little bit and get ahead of the game. So maybe that's what some of these guys were trying to do with the NPC and the Razors, like find these niche hills and scenarios on certain smaller maps where they can pull out a gun that's slightly better at close range than the Dravik and try to get that little advantage. Um, but I don't know. At the end of the day, we're just gonna have to wait and see. And it does, you know, like you said, if the players do in fact deem that the gun is just simply too OP, then it is what it is. But seemingly based on the reaction from other like retired pros and stuff like that, this feels like a case where the NPC doesn't need to be GA'd and the pros are just GAing it anyway. That's my take at least right now and my view from the outside looking in. So I'm unsure if anything will change that. I think this also just goes back to a much bigger discussion too on like weapon balancing and patches and stuff in COD and how it just doesn't necessarily impact the competitive scene because they could drop a patch like tomorrow that quote unquote nerfs the Dravik and the pros will still most likely be
Use it.
using that for the
Yeah.
entire year. So um not sure if I have much else beyond that. I think it's just a little bit of a head scratcher. There has to be some reason why the pros would even attempt to use a different gun than the Dravik, for a different SMG than the Dravik in some of these scenarios. So I at least like that train of thought and the implications of that and what that could lead to throughout the rest of the season, but the options are limited, especially historically not using DLC weapons and stuff like that. So like just GAing the NPC basically like just chops one down and you know it's not like if there's 6 or 7, I didn't even mean to do that. If there's 5+ SMGs in the game, there's obviously going to be some that are just automatically unusable. Like there's one that's a burst SMG that would obviously most likely never be used. So GAing one that's potentially usable in some capacity, like just basically narrows that list even more and gets us closer to the inevitability of just a one SMG meta for the entire year.
It just feels, at least from an outsider's point of view, that it doesn't matter about the how balanced these guns are. It's just the pros don't want to have to deal with multiple different guns. They don't want to have to prepare for variables, let's say. And the NPC, at least at this point, is a variable because very few players have been using it. Like you said, there had really been only one player to pull it out in the first 2 weeks of the CDL season. And then we had this week where a few players were running it this week, or I guess mostly just on Friday, and then Shotzi on Saturday. But like to me, and I should say Octane was much more explicit in his opinion on this. He said, I think they're all idiots. The entire pro ecosystem of Call of Duty is filled with self-fulfilling fucking losers, which is like as explicit as you can get, especially coming from a former pro. And I think I forget, maybe it was Octane, but I think he went further and said like it's this generation of pros. But I want to push back on that part, and I'd say like Octane like came up with Slasher. They teamed together, if I'm not mistaken, a few times. Slasher is in this as well, and the only reason I bring him up is because he just retired. But like Slasher was in on the GA like nonsense as well, and a lot of these older pros, especially like in the later years of their career, were in on GAing these guns. I don't know why that is. I don't know if they just got so fed up with, I will be optimistic or I guess forgiving and say this, that maybe they just got so fed up with the lack of weapon balancing from the developers. And so it was kind of like a defense mechanism that they were like, well, we need to GA these things because we know the devs are incompetent or just don't listen to us. So like, we're going to take it into our own hands. But now they've gone like kind of far past that, in my opinion, and it just seems like these guys just don't want to deal with another gun. They don't want to have to test it. They don't want to have to play against it. They just want to kind of get on the game, not really think too much about it, use the Dravik as the SMG, and then kind of go home. Like to me, that's how it seems. Maybe I'm dead wrong, but I feel like this is a lot more backlash from the former pros and like the flank adjacent guys than you see typically when a GA happens. Typically those guys are much more defensive of the pros and say like, yeah, this gun's busted. Like there's no way that you can play it. They're not defending them like really in the slightest at this point. And I think that's something. I don't know if it'll lead to anything. We have seen GAs revoked or reversed in the past because so much community backlash has happened that the players don't want the smoke. Like they because they vote privately, then those votes get pulled publicly, and then people start changing their votes because they don't want the community to jump down their throat. I don't think it'll get to that point because I don't think that this is as big of an issue as some of the previous GAs, but like a sniper GA really would, I mean, like we've seen in the past, it causes like a real fracas like in the community. So I don't know. It's just a very odd situation that the CDL consistently finds itself in, not just with guns, but just GAs in general. And there's been literally no work or development in this part of the CDL, at least from what we can see from the outside. And I think that's part of like, that definitely stunts the growth of competitive Call of Duty, in my opinion. Stuff like this where you're not going to be able to convince casual players that the NPC is so broken that they can't play with or against the gun. You're just not going to be able to convince the average viewer and the average player to go along with that. But we'll see if anything comes of it. Like you said, I don't think so. I think the Dravik is here to stay unless it gets absolutely nerfed into the ground and it's like completely unusable. At that point, maybe something changes. And then there will be one gun, I'm sure, to replace it, and that will be it. And it's kind of amazing that we had as many guns as we did in like Black Ops 4, even as recently as Black Ops 4. Granted, it was a 5-person meta, 5-person game, but we had a 3-gun meta, which is incredible. And if you look back at Black Ops 2, that is like, that game is ridiculous. Like there were literally like 4 or 5 SMGs that were used regularly at one point or another. Like the PDW got nerfed into like an actual Nerf gun later in that game, but like that was the gun. Like you said, the Scorpion, the MP7, the MSMC, easy for me to say, and a bunch of ARs as well. Like that was a 2 AR game, so we didn't know how good we had it, I guess. But yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get back there again. Let's move on, though. Let's get to the second match of the week, Miami versus Carolina. This was an upset. We talked about it. I think we should probably loop in Carolina's second match as well because we should just have the Royal Ravens conversation now. Sure. They beat the Heretics here 3-1. Miami takes the opening hardpoint, the first ever Blackheart hardpoint. And then Carolina just does their thing, I guess. I didn't know their thing was this, but it is. They win Den S&D, Scar Overload, and then Exposure Hardpoint 250 to 216, despite Ring Core dropping 41. And then you texted me. I was out of the house when you texted me this, but apparently since Exceed joined the lineup, the Ravens were 28-1 in map count in their scrims. And I don't remember who said it, but maybe it was one of probably the flank guys, but apparently like Carolina could not win anything with Neum in the like when they did their trials.
That was Sib, allegedly.
Yeah. So Sib was saying that when Neum was trialed with Carolina, that they could barely get any points, they couldn't win any maps, and then obviously you have this information from Temp with allegedly, when they had Exceed in their lineup, they were basically he compared them to Cold War Atlanta FaZe, one of the best Call of Duty teams of all time. I don't know if I would go that far, but they did beat Miami on Friday, and then earlier today they opened up with a 3-2 win against G2 Minnesota. I think the bad part is that neither Miami or G2 are particularly strong teams, at least at this point in the season. They are definitely vulnerable and flawed in their own way, but Carolina, they crushed Minnesota in the hardpoint, in the first hardpoint today, and then the Game 5 S&D, they win 6-3, Mamba drops 10, Nero drops 9. I really don't know. Like, is this really just Exceed has like leveled up to such a degree that he's kind of Neptune, what we saw last year, where he came in, neither one of us had very high expectations for that Vancouver team, and then they turned out to be like a championship contender? or is this a honeymoon period? What is kind of your read on what Carolina is doing now?
Yeah, I really don't have a solid read on the whole situation and what to expect for the rest of the year, but I'm definitely tempering my expectations a little bit. Like I'm not saying I'm gonna pick Carolina to win Major One or anything just because they beat Miami in G2 this weekend, but I definitely shout out to Carolina and shout out that camp. Like they obviously Slasher retires, so it wasn't like Carolina being proactive necessarily in making a move, but they did, start out with the 0-2 start, only playing 2 matches, but losing both of them before the holiday break, and then they do make a change regardless of what the circumstances were around it, and they immediately flip the script and go 2-0. So, um, at least in the short term, things are looking up for Carolina, and we gotta I gotta at least be you know transparent in terms of what I was saying when I was like evaluating the move and everything last episode, like me questioning Exceed and Nero being like the AR duo. Like Nero dropped 117 kills in the series today. Kremp had a map where he dropped 54, which is the most kills any CDL player has ever dropped in a hard point in any CDL game. And Nero still had more kills than him for the entire series, which is just absolutely ludicrous. And we've seen Nero put up numbers like that before, but that was always with an SMG. So seeing him able to do that when he's using an AR a lot more than previously, that's a good sign for Carolina. And there was an interesting tweet I saw. I don't think I put it in the notes, but it was Exceed's post-match interview today. Some people were like taking it a little bit as a shot at Slasher in terms of him saying like some of the old school slash veteran players don't allow these new guys to like basically like let them off the leash or whatever,
Yeah.
let them just go do their thing. And maybe that is the case here, where we do know they have Craze and Lurks, who are two new players, and maybe this was a situation where early on the system Slasher was trying to implement just wasn't fitting with the new age players coming in, and now they got two former SMG players on ARs, and if anything, that you would think like if an SMG player is trying to go to an AR, as long as they aren't like, just ironed up holding things for 15 seconds, like they're more likely to just be a little bit more aggressive than more of these traditional AR players. So maybe that really is just like what has at least unlocked this early success for Carolina. I'm not going to you know, completely discredit what we've seen for years as winning COD from a player like Slasher and other people. So I'm not going to totally agree with Exceed, but I'm also not going to totally disregard what he said there. I'm just going to, I want to see more from this Carolina team and whether this really is just a honeymoon phase or if this is legit. Because even though it's a very different roster, we had the same type of conversation with Carolina last year. And it was, early on, they found success. And then they teetered off, made a roster change, and completely fell off a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I'm 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 definitely very surprised by Carolina's performance this weekend. But shout out to them, and uh, definitely makes things a little more interesting because if they just make a roster change and they go 2 this weekend, we have a lot less to talk about here today. So, um, I think we're talking about both of Carolina's matches here in the same sense. We just finished talking about G2 against Falcons though, so wrapping in G2's loss to Carolina today. It's another game 5, so that's just continuing the trend for Minnesota. They played 10 maps this weekend, but go 0-2 in the series count. It was definitely an off series from Estriel. Um, Skies, like I don't expect Estriel to have these, quote unquote off performances very often. But Skies is just going to be another case where you got to look at a match like this and you got to get more from the guy who's the biggest veteran in this match and the world champion, and if he's not going to drop the slaying numbers that maybe he once did, you kind of want to see more from him in the S&Ds, and I didn't really see that either from him. So um Not sure what the future holds for G2 and Minnesota on that front, but at least in terms of early season, like we were talking about early on in the preseason, Minnesota looking better than some people expected. Now it seems like maybe they weren't as good as they aren't as good now as they were in the preseason, and that could affect something like Mamba. Like we were talking about Mamba being seemingly a at the top of the rookie of the year list, but losing to Craze here, if Carolina continues to find success, maybe Craze jumps his former teammate Mamba in terms of rookie of the year. So a lot of interesting implications from not only this match, but what it means for the rest of the season.
Yeah, now Carolina, because they won these two matches, they actually have a shot at getting into the winners bracket of Major 1. They had absolutely no shot, I think, if they lost even one of these matches, because they play Toronto next week, and then the last week they play OpTic and then LAT. Those are three of the top 4 or 5 teams in the league. No matter how, like, what you think of LAT at this current point, and we will get there, obviously, but like even then, that's still a very hard matchup, especially for a team that we expected out of Carolina to be a bottom 4 team in the CDL or somewhere around there. Now that they've won those 2 matches, who knows what they can do? Even if they don't win any of the final 3, they might be able to sneak into a tiebreaker kind of situation and get in. But yeah, I this is really shocking. Them beating Miami is kind of concerning for my Miami stock, I would say, and not just Carolina, but like I don't know, like it. Maybe I gotta be more patient with the Heretics and let it ride out. They do have 2 very winnable matches next week against Vancouver and Boston that definitely feel like must wins in some way for them. Minnesota, though, that's a really hard way to lose. They go to Game 5 against 2 teams that they certainly seem like they can beat in the Falcons and Royal Ravens, and they lose both of those matches. We saw them losing Game 5 to Boston in the final week before the break. So that's 3 Game 5 losses. They beat C9 in a Game 5 to start the season. So 4 of the first 5 matches this year for Minnesota have gone to a Game 5, something we've come to expect of the Rocker or / G2. But again, we talked about it, I think, in our New Year's resolutions. Stop going to Game 5. Even if you win a lot of them, you're going to lose a lot of them. And if Minnesota had been able to finish out and close out series last year, they probably would have went to champs, and they weren't able to. They lost a lot of Game 5s, and it ultimately kind of doomed them in the standings late in the season, where they realistically should have been able to box out either Boston or OpTic if they had just won a handful more series than they did. And granted, it is a long ways away from that at this point. We're only 3 weeks into the season, but these are very winnable matches that they're playing right now. The only match so far that they realistically should not have won was against OpTic. But other than that, they played C9, Boston, Falcons, and Carolina. Those are 4 of probably the bottom 5 or 6 teams, you would say, right? Along with Minnesota and Vancouver. They should beat a lot of those teams. They have to beat a lot of those teams in order to really set themselves up either to get into the winners bracket of Major 1 or later in the season have a good shot at making champs, which is the ultimate goal for an organization like Minnesota, which has been very up and down over the years. So, I think it's very impressive from Carolina. I did think it was kind of a little bit of shot at Slasher from Exceed. I don't know if it was like really meant as like Slasher in particular, but I think Exceed, because he's been on the outside looking in over the years and he's seen Slasher kind of like get benched and dropped and then like get picked up and like his teams underperform but still get a shot, while Exceed has been in challengers for like the last like 4 years, probably begging to get another shot at it. I'm sure this is kind of cathartic for him to be able to have this kind of showing and this team have this kind of showing. So, congrats to him. We definitely were not very respectful or as respectful as we could have been. But I obviously this kind of stuff needs to continue. They do probably need to pick up at one more win just to feel safe in the winners bracket. But either way, I think they're definitely going to be a lot more feared in the losers bracket, even if they started in losers round one, come major one. So I'm sure we'll talk more about Carolina. Saturday, January 10th, though, we start off with one of the most anticipated matches of the season to this point, OpTic Texas versus FaZe Vegas. OpTic comes in undefeated, the only undefeated team left in the CDL, and that did not last one bit. Draza, who has this impeccable record against OpTic throughout his career, spanning from LA Thieves to Atlanta and now FaZe Vegas, they absolutely rolled OpTic 3-0. Close maps, but still to sweep the defending world champions who had not lost to this point is just astounding. And we had been talking so much about FaZe lately because they did not look very good at certain points before the break. And then they beat Paris, which was pretty surprising. And then they pick up a Luka as a substitute, and we're talking about that and not really how good this team can be without a Luka, and they kind of showed how good they really can be. A 3-0 win. Does this kind of move the needle for you for FaZe and like where they are in relation to OpTic and Paris and LAT and Toronto as championship contenders?
Yes, it has to. And I think a big thing, admittedly, even from us, but I think from the community at large as well, that's kind of like flown under the radar until this match was FaZe's schedule to start this year. They played LAT, Paris, Toronto, and OpTic, and they're 3-1.
Yeah.
No matter how you shake it, or no matter where you want to put FaZe, that they are inarguably on paper, those are the top 5 teams in the game. And their only loss being to LAT, especially based on what we've seen from LAT lately, that's a little weird, but we've seen this before, and we've talked about it, like the triangles and circles of Team A beats B, B beats C, but C beats A, and that sort of, situation where, like a rock, paper, scissors sort of deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was completely not expecting FaZe to just 3-0 basically DoorDash this series. Like you said, the individual maps were close, but it was pretty convincing and a very solid showing from FaZe. I put in the notes I should have never doubted the CEO, and Draza came to play, especially all the stuff over the break with is Aluka gonna replace Draza? Like, seemingly, whether it actually affected Draza or not, we'll never know. But seemingly, it might have lit a fire under him and been the spark that he needed to, put up a performance. Or maybe it's just a case of playing OpTic was the spark he needed to, get him on the right track for the rest of the year. So we'll have to see what FaZe does against the rest of the league. But based on these early performances against the other quote unquote top teams, like, I mean, FaZe shouldn't lose a match for the rest of these qualifiers. Like, they should most likely be the top seed, especially with the tiebreakers and especially with LAT losing today, because I believe they're now 2-2. So, like, if FaZe wins out, their only loss would be a team that has more losses, so they would be the top seed. Yeah, I mean, just especially the conversation around OpTic coming into this, at least for me, I don't think there was a lot of talking points, but like on the resolutions, I said, see how long you can go with this winning streak to start the season, and they immediately get 3-0'd by FaZe in the first match. I saw some stuff on Twitter, like people talking about like a series count streak, like including EWC and champs from last year and tying it in with this year, and that was like, that went back to the previous year when even we were talking about the quote unquote three-peat for FaZe, including EWC and stuff like, and we were like, I'm not gonna get that, was on a different game, and we were trying to like separate it and figure out how we wanted to break it down. So I guess that's just at least in terms of like OpTic's current series streak with Mercules or combining last year and this year. Don't have to worry about that now. They started a new one today, but um yeah, just overall from this, I mean, even some people have been saying it like it wasn't necessarily totally the simp show in this series. Like he played well, don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of the people have now been saying like Simp is the clear cut best player in the game at this point, and I
I mean,
think that just wasn't
yeah.
a thing that people like. I don't want to say people forgot about Simp or anything like that, but it certainly seemed like people are like a little bit. I don't want to say stunned or shocked because again, those words don't seem accurate, but it was kind of like maybe this was just like I don't think reality check is
This
apt
is the
either, but like
breakout, I
this
think, or like the realization for people that like, oh shit,
it was yeah, it just like kind of cemented it. Like yeah, I mean Sim's still pretty good at Call of Duty. Like like
yeah,
anyone who doubted him, he was like, yeah, I'm still here. You know, maybe it's because it's the first time he's playing without a BZ. People are just like uh trying to think of other things to say and whatnot, but I do think maybe it was part of those early preseason tournaments, and this would be the opposite of what we were talking about with G2 Minnesota, right? Like
mm-hmm.
G2 Minnesota looked good in those preseason tournaments, and that kind of impacted what people were expecting from them heading into uh, the actual CDL season. Maybe like FaZe losing to a couple, I think to OpTic and LAT and like the Kason and Monster tournaments and stuff. Maybe that like kind of clouded people's expectations for this FaZe team, but I admittedly was not even like really putting two and two together in terms of looking at the four teams that FaZe had actually played until this weekend when I saw people start talking about it. I was like, damn, like I can't believe we were. This feels like, some other times where it's
Yeah.
been like we going into tournaments, we're like, oh, maybe this is the one FaZe doesn't win, and then they just go on a nasty run in their previous years, and it's like, oh, we should never doubted them. That's really my takeaway from this. Is like I guess I just, shame on me for doubting FaZe, and they proved me wrong here, but it was an awesome series from FaZe. Definitely a reality check. I feel better saying this phrase for OpTic, a bit of a reality check for OpTic because I think, from the outside looking in, it definitely felt like OpTic thought that they were kind of untouchable, and this was like the first time that they're losing now in a while. So, um, yeah, I'm excited to see. Maybe this is like, you know, it's always good when OpTic and FaZe have a rivalry,
Oh yeah, definitely.
regardless of the roster and stuff. So maybe this is you know, a matchup that heading into the season, maybe some people, especially with like the Paris OpTic showdowns in those preseason tournaments, maybe people weren't as excited or anticipating FaZe versus OpTic as much as in previous years. But I think now it's definitely one, especially we see that in the winners finals of Major One, which is a quote unquote home major for OpTic. That could be a juicy one.
Yeah, shout out Ishmael Sierra and Jay Hearn in the YouTube chat. Um, I mean, that's a great point by you about the schedule, and I hadn't noticed that either. But I mean, for you to come into the season and play LAT, who prior to the final major last year was probably the best team in the game, and like what we thought was gonna be the world champion or the runner up or something, and then they obviously play Paris, who we thought was the second best team in the league going into that match. Then they play, I just lost them, and then they play Toronto, who I mean we saw today what they're really capable of against like a top 4, top 5 team, and then they play OpTic, the defending world champion, undefeated, and like you said, to go 3-1 in that is remarkable and really should set them up. Like they have a clear cut path to the number 1 seed. Like if they don't get the number 1 seed in this major, that's all on them. That is all on like just you fumbled at the 1 yard line because you did the hard part. You got through the top 5. Like literally the entire schedule that they played that's the top 5 including FaZe Vegas. Like that is literally the upper echelon of the CDL to this point. And they only have C9, Minnesota, and Vancouver left on this qualifier schedule. And so that it should be a clear cut. 6-1 record, number 1 seed, no matter who else goes 6-1 as well, because they own the tiebreakers of literally everybody except LAT, which cannot finish 6-1 at this point.
Yep.
I really like for OpTic. I think, like you said, it is a reality check. This is kind of a wake up call. Not saying like they were kind of riding high and like taking these things lightly. I just think there's a natural reset that a winning team needs sometimes, to just kind of get slapped in the face and be like, oh shit, like we're not untouchable, that there are some things or a lot of things that we need to work on as a team and get better at, that so that this doesn't become an issue later on in the season. We saw it with OpTic last year. They got, I wouldn't even say that's a wake-up call. That was like a nightmare, that they were like being dragged to hell for 3/4 of the season, and then Mercules woke them up and they went to the World Championship and absolutely cruised to it. This year is obviously different. I think they're in a much better place as a team. I don't worry about them losing to FaZe. We've seen that many times in the past where FaZe beats OpTic, and then when it gets to a major, or certainly later in the season, sometimes that doesn't matter at all. Sometimes they don't play, and like whatever happens. Like OpTic can go the whole season at majors and maybe not play FaZe in like a really critical match. They might play in like winners round 1 or like one of the losers bracket matches, but I really don't think like it's that big of a deal unless FaZe is going to be the championship contender that they have been in the past, where they're going to be on Championship Sunday every 5 weeks, every 6 weeks. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but if FaZe plays the way that they have been playing over the last month or so, it does seem like they can actually give OpTic and Paris and some of these top teams a run for their money. And then that, leads to the obvious question of what happens with Luka if FaZe is an actual championship contender. Like you don't want to upset the apple cart, for a lack of a better metaphor, but I just think it at this win, this result adds so much to the CDL season, and I'm really happy it ended up like this versus OpTic kind of cruising to a win. And then we're kind of like, well, FaZe is a tier below what OpTic is, but with FaZe winning this, it calls into question how FaZe lost to LAT to start the season. That result seems very odd in retrospect, because FaZe beating all of the other top teams but losing to LAT, who got absolutely crushed by 2 of the top teams that FaZe beat, seems a little odd. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next up, we had Vancouver and Boston. Unless you had anything else on FaZe before we move on.
I was just going to throw out, just to put it in there, we didn't talk about the specific numbers with this match, but shots 15 and 31 in the map 3, 0.61 KD in the series overall. The Aches crew was definitely eaten with this one, and I saw he said on the flag something like, no superstar I know ever dropped a 0.6 KD or something like that. So that was some good clean fun. But the Draza stuff after the match was pretty funny as well. He said in the post-game interview that when OpTic was streaming scrims, he felt like Shotzi was saying a little too much, and then Draza tweeted after, just OpTic, not at Champs, which I think he meant that as an insult, but I would take that, Champs is the biggest tournament for COD.
It doesn't matter.
Like, like if OpTic is just good at Champs, like, oh darn, like it's kind of like T1 in League of Legends, like they win Worlds every year. It's like, oh, who cares about the rest of the season? But so I thought that was just a funny tweet overall. But yeah, I think this is, I'm hopeful that this result, because I feel like if OpTic just stomped FaZe, like, again, similar to Carolina, we wouldn't have as much to talk about today, but FaZe pulling off this win gives us even more to look forward to throughout the rest of the year.
Next up, we had Vancouver versus Boston. Vancouver coming in had not won a match. They had not won a map. They were the only team not to have won a map in the first few weeks of the CDL season. Of course, they made a roster change. They did not. Yeah, they did not officially make that roster change or announce their replacement for Legend until, what time did you say? 12:05 a.m. Eastern of January 10th. So these motherfuckers, like, they played whatever it was, like 16 hours later with I mean, they just picked him up. It's crazy how they didn't practice at all with TJ. But I mean, it did kind of look like that. They lost the first two maps of this series to Boston, 250 to 205, and then 6-3 S&D. And then Vancouver wins their first map of the season, Exposure Overload 3-2. Then they win Den Hardpoint 250 to 179. And then Den S&D, they win 6-1. TJ goes 9-3. And Vancouver reverse sweeps Boston, who we had talked about it before this week, that they were in a very good position to go like 4-3, maybe even 5-2 if things really worked out in the qualifiers and set themselves up for a winner's bracket spot. That is a little more complicated now when you lose to Vancouver, but Vancouver wins this 3-2. They get their first win of the season. TJ gets his revenge on one of 1,100 CDL teams that he's been on in his career. But I really don't know what to say. I don't know if this is just Boston being Boston, where they have like these series where it's just like, how did you lose this match and then you beat OpTic the next week? Like, some of these things don't really line up.
Yeah.
How much do you feel that it was the TJ effect, and that him, a veteran player like TJ, replacing Legend, a true blue Call of Duty rookie? How much did you feel that had an effect on this series outcome?
I don't know if that necessarily did for this individual series. Obviously, TJ played phenomenal in the map 5 in general, also played well in map 4, dropping 30 kills. But truthfully, I think my big overarching takeaway for this weekend, whether it's like actual reality or not, it is a fact now. We've had two teams make very proactive roster changes. And obviously, last year, with the whole OpTic Pred situation at the start of the year, that was the earliest that we've seen a team make a change without it really being expected and the circumstances around it. But with these two teams, these were two teams, and again, I understand the situations were different between Legend being benched and Slasher retiring. But the fact of the matter is, these two teams were somewhat proactive in terms of identifying that they needed to or had to make a roster change, and they didn't wait around and continue to just lose matches, struggle. They addressed the issue, whether it was their own decision or not. That's different for each team, but they made moves and immediately saw results. And that has been a topic that we have talked about with other teams over the years, and even spans to a team like LAT as recent as today's match. Like, if something's going wrong and the longer you wait, it might not necessarily get better, and then you are putting your back against the wall. Whereas these teams, Vancouver and Carolina, were at the bottom of the standings. They both pick up wins, and completely, like, it's not overgassing it to say they completely changed the trajectory of their season. I'm not saying they're going to go from worst to first, but before these roster moves, it was looking like they were just going to stay at the very bottom of the standings. And now with these wins, objectively, they are at least somewhat better than what we were anticipating. Like, we were joking about, is Vancouver even going to win a map or a series in these qualifiers? For Carolina, we weren't sure what to expect, and they went out, identified they needed to make a change regardless of what that reason for the change was, and they did it, and they're seeing the benefits of it early on. Whether that's the honeymoon phase or the reality of the situation, again, we've talked about it in terms of, like, you want to play teams that are beatable on paper in your first match with a new roster. These teams weren't playing against the quote-unquote top teams with these new rosters, so that would possibly have an impact on this conversation and change things up a little bit. But end of the day, like, the start of this Boston series, Boston went up 80-0 in map 1. looked pretty convincing in the map 2 S&D, and I think right around then is when the football game started yesterday, and I was like, I'm not even going to really pay much attention to the rest of the series. I'll wait till Paris is on, and then sure enough, we get a reverse sweep. I wasn't expecting that at all. Like you said, it's kind of been a Boston thing where they have these matches, you completely write them off, and they pull off the upset, and then you expect Boston to take care of business against some of these other teams, and they just don't come out with the fire. But that wasn't the case here, because they did come out with the fire. It got extinguished very early, and they let a beatable Vancouver. Uh, they let this winnable match completely slip through their fingers, and I don't know what to really say about Boston in terms of how that happened and what the case may be. But end of the day, shout out Vancouver for proving some people wrong. Shout out DJ for coming back in and having an impact. Circling back to your main question, I'm not gonna totally pin this on, oh yeah, TJ came in, was the vet, and led these boys to victory or anything like that. Even though he did show up in those last two maps in particular. But again, overarching, this is another case where we have seen a team make that proactive roster move arguably earlier than other teams would in previous seasons, and it paid immediate dividends.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, they did change the trajectory of their season. And we talked about it at the time when they made the move, at least when they announced that Legend was getting benched. We talked about how, like, most players that they could pick up are going to be better than Legend is now. Like, that's really not up for debate. Like, he literally has played, what, 3 matches of Call of Duty League action in his career. Those are the only matches of pro Call of Duty that he's ever played. Granted, because Challengers is not professional Call of Duty. Granted, I should say, like, there are a lot of pros or ex-pros, but it's still not pro COD. So, like, to me, and Jay Hearn said in the chat that they set Legend up for failure. And I mean, if you want to go back, 2 or 3 episodes ago, we made that very, very clear. Like, over 25, 30 minutes, we basically just said that Vancouver is really stupid. And I still believe that. I don't care about them beating Boston because they're still 1-4. They still, even if TJ is like the perfect solution for this team, they are still one of the bottom 4 teams in this league based on talent. Or at least like realized talent, because I think there's a lot of potential on this team, but we haven't seen a lot of these guys actually do anything with that potential. Like, Abe has shown flashes, but he's a rookie. Like, he played EWC with Toronto, but he hasn't played a ton of CDL matches. Lunars has played almost a full season now, if you include last season and then this part of this season. And yet, like, people have always talked about since he came into the CDL, like, he hasn't been living up to the potential that people thought he would when he was in Challengers. Gwen is the realized potential. Gwen is a star, and Gwen is by far the best player on this team. And however far Vancouver can go will be however far Gwen can take them. And TJ is a good player in support of Gwen. But still, my point with Legend, and I think your point as well, was this is not a championship level roster. This is not anywhere close to that. So what is the goal? What is the objective of this team? Did you sign this roster to win a championship or to compete for championships? If so, that was a failed mission from day one. So why not let Legend take his lumps with this team that can't compete, rather than bring in a guy who's been in the CDL or CWL for 7-8 years now, and he's a very well-known quantity right now. Like, we know exactly what TJ brings to a team and what he does not bring to a team. I would say with Legend, it's more unknown, so that the floor is very low, a lot lower than TJ's floor, but you would hope, considering you signed him without him ever playing pro Call of Duty before, you would hope that the ceiling is higher. So that's kind of like an addendum to the Legend rant that we had from a few weeks ago. But this is a good start, I guess, to what Vancouver's trying to do, and that's be more competitive. I don't know how consistent they're going to be able to be because when they go up against the top half of the league, I think it's just going to be a really hard fight for them. They just don't
What you saw
have,
today.
yeah, like they just don't have the firepower to compete with a lot of these top teams, and you kind of need to be in that Boston vein of like we can pull off the upset even though we're pretty inconsistent. We might not be as great as these other teams. You need to kind of follow that path. I just don't know if they're going to be able to consistently enough do that and pull off upsets against OpTic or FaZe or LAT or whoever, and then also beat the likes of Boston and Minnesota and C9 consistently enough to get into the top 8 of the standings at the end of the season. Granted, that's far away, so we'll get to see a lot, but I'm just not sold. Boston is kind of, it is what it is. Like this is why I picked them as the last place team in the league to start the season. They are, I root for them, because they're so loyal to the team. They've had like the same 3 guys for the better part of like 2.5 years, and that's awesome. But this is kind of what happens sometimes. They just lose matches that, frankly, they should not lose, considering they beat Minnesota in a game 5. They beat Carolina pre-exceed, so maybe that result would be different now. But a weird loss for Boston. And then we had a weird series to end on Saturday. Like this was way more competitive than it should have been. We obviously Paris to this point. Of course, we didn't know what FaZe was about to do to OpTic, but to this point, Paris was the second best team in the league pretty definitively, even though they had lost to FaZe. From that preseason cup to what we had seen, especially against LAT, I was like, okay, like Paris is a true championship contender. C9 looked like a true championship contender on this match. 250-249 win for Paris and hard point to start off. Then a round 11 win for C9 in the S&D. We go to 9 rounds, 9 points, 5-4, C9 win, exposure overload to go up 2-1 in this series. And you said in the notes, they almost choke a 5-1 lead. It could have been a 3-0 series had they been able to edge out Paris in the Den hardpoint. And then that's kind of where it turns. Paris absolutely rolls them, Colossus hardpoint, and then a very decisive exposure S&D win. What is your takeaway from something like this where I feel like just personally, I have so much more attention drawn to C9 in this? Or should we think that Paris is maybe not as strong or as solid as we had once believed going into the break?
Yeah, I really, I haven't watched the final season of Stranger Things yet, so no spoilers on that. But if the start of this, if Cloud9 won Map 1, which they all basically should have, like Gentlemates kind of stole that with a late comeback, and Cloud9 3-0's Gentlemates, like I would officially said, like this weekend was in the upside down. Like everything was just, even like you said with early on our pick'ems and stuff like that, like the results were almost completely what we just weren't expecting at that point. That being said, I have been a little higher on this Cloud9 roster than other people, and this is kind of like, I'm not gonna say something ludicrous like I expected Cloud9 to beat Gentlemates because there was no world I ever did,
No.
but the fact they were very competitive with this Gentlemates team is definitely eye-opening. Beans absolutely putting on a display with the sniper. That was one thing I mentioned in our our wish list episode, was continuing to see him, because that was like the one thing that really stuck out to me from Cloud9's early matches before the holiday break. Like, after the break for us, it'd been a while since I've seen this Cloud9, but that was still sticking in my head. And he showed in the map 2 today why that was so, memorable. And that's going to be something we see going forward, having a big impact for Cloud9. Like a round 11 sniper ace, you don't see that very often at any level of Call of Duty, let alone in the CDL. Um, so that's going to be a real weapon, and it might be like a double-edged sword where Cloud9 lives and dies by the beam sniper. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but that is absolutely a weapon for Cloud9 to use going forward, in the sense of teams are going to have to prepare for being sniper, and how that impacts how other teams play an S&D, and then how C9 uses that to their advantage, in the sense of it's going to be a mind game. Like Cloud9's going to be like, okay, these teams are going to know Beams wants to snipe here. We can push this side of the map because they're going to go, and that sort of like back and forth little mental mind game in terms of preparation. That could be an advantage for Cloud9 going forward. So I know, it's weird to talk about Cloud9 this much. That this was definitely just a series where I would have expected General Mates to wipe the floor with these guys, which admittedly they took care of business in those last two maps. That was more of what I would have expected from this series going into it. But when you have those expectations on General Mates and what we've seen from them early on in the season, and then you get a showing like this from Cloud9, I can't help but be a little more animated in terms of what this could potentially mean for Cloud9 going forward. And again, this could just go back to a situation where this was a good matchup for the Cloud9 guys, and maybe they come back down to earth a little bit against these other teams. That we'll have to wait and see. But at least heading out of the holiday break, since this is the only showing we saw from Cloud9, it's, if you're gonna lose a 3-2 series to General Mates, like, this is about as good of a showing as you could have asked for. It definitely has to sting, because that map one was so winnable, and they could have closed it out. But can't do anything about that now. It's just, we'll have to see if this is more of what we can expect from Cloud9 going forward, or if this was an outlier.
Yeah, it's just one of those matches where they're going to be thinking about this for a bit, C9, where, if they had won this series, that just gives them a lot more breathing room as they go into the final 2 weeks of the qualifiers. They play FaZe, Boston, and Falcons over the final 2 weeks. They have to win probably two of those, two of the three. If they had won today, obviously that puts them in a situation where they really probably only need to win one of the three, which seems like pretty likely. Like, I mean, Falcons is going to be not the most difficult, but like more difficult probably than Boston. Granted, who knows what Boston shows up. So, but like, it would have definitely put them in a lot better position for the qualifying of Major 1 had they won this match. That's just how it goes. We've seen that a lot in the past, and I think that really is the difference between great teams, good teams, and the mediocre and bad teams. Is like the good and great teams just find a way to win these matches that maybe they didn't play their best, or the team that we didn't expect a lot of actually played very, very well, and in some ways outplayed them, and yet that team just ends up winning. The better team, the good, the great team, they end up winning these series, even if it's ugly, and that is kind of what we think of Paris. I think that they're a great team. I think they're truly a championship contending team. But it has to suck for C9 to be that close to sweeping Paris, which would have been like a holy shit. Like, what just happened? Like, not only a game 5, but like a 3-0 of C9 versus Paris would have been a shock to the system. Even more so than any of the other results this weekend. But, that's just how it goes sometimes. You're not able to pull it off, and it's just going to be another loss on the schedule for C9. Jay Hearn in the YouTube chat, he said, what's your ranking from today, team rankings? And he also said that G2 needs to make a change for Skies. I mean, I've made that argument at least about G2 and Skies since they picked them up. I just don't know what they can do about that. They just don't have a lot of options. And then the rankings, I mean, I was thinking about it since I've seen the comment. I still have OpTic at number 1 as like the defending world champions, and how I do power rankings is if the season ended today, who's like the most likely, who's the second most likely to win champs. even though we just saw FaZe beat OpTic, I still would have a hard time picking against OpTic. So I think it's probably OpTic. I think maybe FaZe at 2, Paris at 3, Toronto at 4, LAT at 5. But that's pretty fluid. We're going to do our power rankings in a few weeks.
After Major 1.
After Major 1, before the very long Major 2 qualifiers begin. So, we'll go into depth. We don't typically rank them, more so, tier them. Even though sometimes I only have one team in the tiers, so that it shows you where I think of them. But yeah, I think there's a lot of fluidity in that top 5, I would say. I think there's a pretty solid top 5. I don't think that like Falcons have made it into that group, but if they keep winning, then they might be something to kind of reckon with as we move forward. We already talked about G2 versus Carolina. Anything you want to just mention off the bat here? Granted, already talked about Carolina specifically.
Yeah, I just wanted to loop it in with the last one just because we didn't actually explicitly talk about him, but I know you're a big fan, so want to mention it in particular. Ghosty continues his incredibly hot start to the season, dropping a 1.32 KD in this series and 112 kills. The reason I wanted to tie that back in with the 112 number, that would have been the highest number until the number I mentioned earlier, Nero, 117 kills today in this series that we already talked about earlier in the episode. That's just absolutely ridiculous. He did 15,000 damage. The next highest was Mamba at 13.2k. So, I mean, that's just, again, I want to see more from both Minnesota and Carolina. But early dividends, obviously, with the Exceed and Nero AR duo that we probably weren't expecting, but also shout out Ghosty for the master class at especially those last 3 maps against Cloud9, 31-23 in the Overload, 33-23 map 4, and then 9-2 in the game 5 to close it out.
I don't know if you saw this, but Ben talking about Ghosty, he said he's been dropped off to top 2 teams, and he's got the Haggy problem. I don't know what to do with that one. Like,
I think the situation with OpTic was very different than this situation with LAT. I think this is more of a dropping than that the OpTic team he joined, like,
post
obviously he got dropped, but I just think the circumstances were different, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Ben definitely has those bit of an inside connection to some of the players and former players and stuff like that, and obviously those people talk, so maybe it's something we have to think about more going forward. But I really like what I've seen from Ghosty on the map this year, and you can't help but think, what would Ghosty be doing on LAT right now if he was still on that team instead of Kenny?
Do you think Ghosty and Killa would have gotten along? Like, do you think they would have been best buds?
I don't know about best buds, but definitely would have been interesting to have them in a room together.
Honestly, let's build a time machine and let's drop Ghosty in Impact in BO2. Let's see what he does with Mir and Karma and Killa. I think him and Sloss would have been cutting up. I think. I don't know. Like, to me, if he has the Haggy problem, like, who the fuck cares? Like, he's one of the best ARs in the world, and he's consistently on championship contending teams. Like, we have to admit how bad of a place OpTic was when he came into that team that year. Like, they were in complete disarray, as I guess like a yearly tradition for OpTic for some reason. But like, that was like post Scump retirement. Like, Rambo got ousted off of that team as the coach, and like, because he tried to bench Dashy, and Dashy said like, you're going bowling, or like, there's a lot of stuff going on in that team. And Ghosty came in as a rookie into OpTic of all teams and was very effective. That team was a lot better. That LAT team, the rebuilding LAT team, turned out to be like a really good, competitive team by the end of the year. And then obviously last year they were the best team in the league until the last part of the season, which how much of that are you blaming on Ghosty and like the outside issues? I would also say that there's a lot of volatile personalities on LAT. Like if the comparison for Ghosty is Haggy, then Scrap is Killa, right? Like Scrap's pretty outspoken, and like that's no disrespect or anything. Like he's one of the best players in the world, but like, yeah, I don't know if Ghosty can be completely blamed off of that. And Karma, I think, also had some of his issues on Impact as well. So like, I don't like, is he Hydra in this scenario? Like, I don't know if this really fits like 1-to-1.
Yeah.
But if they're winning, then does it really matter? Because I don't think Crim6 was like too nice of a teammate. Like I don't know if I would have been like wanted to like share like an office space with Crim a lot, but like he's literally one of the best, most accomplished FPS players of all time. Aches is also not necessarily one of the nicest, like warmest personalities, and you know, he was a superstar once upon a time, I think he would say. So it just all kind of seems like bullshit. And, you know, I'm not saying that Ben doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't want to say that. I just don't know how much it actually matters if he's on these contending teams, unless he's the reason that these teams like construct. Like, I don't know if that's the case.
The one thing I will say, and I don't know if these things are tied together, but it's something I literally just thought about while you were talking, was you and I were both a lot higher on this Gentlemates team heading into the season than other people, and part of that was seemingly other parts of the community saying like there would be chemistry issues and out of game stuff with this team. And if this is coming up about Ghosty now, maybe the two are correlated, and that's part of why people were having this assessment of Gentlemates. But at this point, I mean, can't argue with the results we've seen so far from Ghosty and this team in general. So maybe this is just the formula for success for him. Obviously, it's very early in the season. We'll have to see going forward. But yeah, I'm not sure how much this really matters, but definitely it's not the first time we've heard this sort of conversation around this team and Ghosty now.
Yeah, I think the best way I can put it is the reputation and the I don't know, like difficult personalities part. It matters until it doesn't, and it doesn't matter until it does. Like there's no other way to put it. Like Impact was always super toxic with each other, as those streams can attest to, and yet they won a world championship. They won, I think they won MLG Dallas that year. The OpTic Dynasty, those guys have been very candid about like they were not having a ton of fun with each other for a long time, and yet they're called the OpTic Dynasty. The Cole Dynasty, very much similar. Clayster literally got dropped from a Dynasty team because they just did not get along to the degree that they probably should have, and then they brought in Karma and just kind of picked up where they left off. Just in general, these things don't matter until people decide that they should matter at that point. And I mean, if Paris goes and wins a world championship or they win majors, does this matter? No, it really doesn't. Like they could literally hate each other to the nth degree, but at the end of the day, if they're winning, these teams will continue to team together, or the players will continue to team together. And we'll talk about like, wasn't it crazy that these guys like wanted to punch each other as soon as the game ended? And it'd just be kind of a funny thing that we talk about, not something that actually ends up being like consequential in the team dynasty biography or whatever. So, you know, we'll see. Vancouver versus OpTic, that was earlier today. OpTic bounced back with 3-1 win. Vancouver ends up winning the overload, but this was not necessarily a competitive series. It was like, you know, not a complete stomp, but the S&D was 6-0. The second hard point was nearly a 100-point win. This just seemed like how you would expect a OpTic Vancouver match to go. This is number 1 versus number 12. Granted, there's some tiebreakers in there now. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything on this series. It's just this is a good way to bounce back for OpTic. This
Yep.
is about what I expect from this series.
Yeah, and exactly how I would have argued that heading into this weekend, you expected a 3-0. So, obviously Vancouver didn't have a map win before the Boston series. Um, so the fact that this version of Vancouver was able to get a map win off of OpTic has to be like a small moral victory in some sense, especially like Lunars putting on a very good performance, 32-19 in that map 3. Um, but yeah, Mercules put on a show. Shotzi had a very important bounce back, like you said, especially in comparison to his performance against FaZe earlier in the weekend. And yeah, this was just business as usual. It would have been a much more concerning situation for OpTic had they lost this series, but that's not the world we live in.
And then the final match of the weekend, I think we even said it on the last episode that this was one of the most, if not the most anticipated match for us, because the last time we saw LAT, they were in complete shambles. It was one of the most lopsided losses from like 2 top teams that I can remember when they played Paris. They just got absolutely smoked. Today was not as bad, but it was not very good either. They get swept again, so they're on what a 6-map losing streak now against 2 of the top 5 teams, which is, I mean, I guess it's better than losing like this to Boston and Vancouver or something, but it definitely does not inspire a lot of confidence that LAT is a actual championship contender against teams like Toronto and Paris. They do have that win over FaZe, but today they lose 3-0, a relatively competitive hardpoint, then a 6-3 S&D. Joe Deceives was absolutely cooking them. This was a Joe Deceives revenge match, and he looks like he was on ice skates. Like, he just kind of flies around the map, and Abizi goes 2-8. Like, obviously, those guys are very close outside of the game, and they're very comparable in play styles. It was like night and day with how they performed in that S&D. And then 4-0 overload on Den. Kenny, most notably, drops a 0.65 in the overload. He did not have a great series again. He had a 0.69 in the hard point. He had like a 0.66 in this series.
Yep.
The only reason I'm singling him out is because everybody else is going to single him out in this as well. Yep. And I think I don't know, like, is the question that we should come out of this being like, does LAT make this move now or do they wait?
I mean, I think this is full circle for our entire episode and overall takeaways. Like, we saw Carolina and Vancouver get some results when they made these changes. Thieves, seemingly from the outside looking in, a little more hesitant to make an actual change to the starting lineup, and they are seemingly paying for it here.
Yep.
Not, like you said, I do not agree with fully blaming Kenny for this result. It definitely feels like other people in the community too are noticing that it feels like something is off with Abizi and Hydra, and again, the first time Abizi is playing with another sub SMG in his, well, not in his career,
other
but
than E6 and E United.
Yeah, for the majority of his career. And Abizi didn't play fantastic overall individually either, but obviously when Kenny's putting up a 0.66 for the series, that is going to stick out, and that's immediately what people are going to jump to. And again, looping back in the FaZe conversation, like the Aluka thing, like Aluka being tied to Draza. Draza comes out, puts up a really strong performance. Now that isn't as much of a conversation. Kenny does the exact opposite. He had the opportunity in the series to come out, put up a strong showing, and people are not going to be talking about Neum being needed to come right in right away. Instead, the opposite happens. He struggles, and now that conversation is going to continue to loom. And even there was a clip from the Scump Watch Party, like at the end of this series, like Scraps just staring at his webcam, almost in disbelief. and the CDL like zooms in on just like it was the 4 pictures of the 4 guys on LAT, and then they zoomed in just on Scrap's picture, and Scump's like, oh, that's not right, or maybe it was Formal who said that's not right, but he literally like looked like it was just like a blank face, and he looked like stunned in disbelief, and you got to think. I saw even Aches had a tweet just before we went live, like tweeted just at Scrap, and like, the wheels are turning in the mind, whether you want to admit it or not. Like Scrap has to be sitting back, like, damn, I really had the chance to possibly get a Luca 3 weeks ago, and now I got this happening to me. Where and like he's got to be thinking of the what ifs and all that, and that's a bad situation to be in when this team has so much talent and potential to be performing so much better than we've seen in recent showings. So I do think, again, like going into this match, we both picked Toronto, and I said last episode I wasn't expecting you to pick Toronto, but now, like, based on this showing, like, I'm almost like, did anybody actually pick LATs to win this one? And now going forward, what does this mean for LAT's future matches? Like, this is a very difficult situation for LAT. I think it, like you said, shout out Joe. He basically went out like, I started in the notes. Scrap and Hydra went on a 6 and a 5 spree in the map one, and I thought that was going to be the difference maker. But then Joe one ups them and goes on a 5 spree after that to like give Toronto the map one win. And then in the last round of the SMG, Joe was in this one room, which I don't know the callouts in these maps because I haven't played them for multiplayer, but he was laying on one side of a divider and the bomb site was behind him, and Rial went to plant the bomb, and it's like Rial was clearly expecting Joe to watch that way. So the guys ran on the other side of the divider, which Joe couldn't see, to kill Rial. But because Joe was on that other side, LAT also wasn't expecting him to be there, and he just gets a 2-piece for free, and then gets the other 2 kills. It was like the wildest ace I've seen in a long time. That just like it was like COD timing to a T, and like Rial definitely had to be like, oh, what the hell? Like, how did they just kill me? And then Joe was like, don't worry about it. I'm just gonna get this 2-piece, and then I'm just gonna get the ace and close things out. Like, phenomenal showing out of Joe. But yeah, lots of questions around LAT that I think they did not want to be in this situation. I think they really wanted to come out and like shut up a lot of the doubters with a strong showing here against another strong team, quote unquote strong team, depending on how you rank them and all that. But um, yeah, tough spot, and I feel for Kenny, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like 2 years in a row now, he suffered situations like this where he's not performing up to the caliber that we've seen from him for so long and so many previous other titles and years, and it's gotta be killing him because I know how much of a competitor he is and how much he wants to win at the end of the day. And whether you blame him or not, I know for a fact Kenny is taking it hard and blaming himself, and it's it can't be easy, and I don't have a good solution in terms of what the immediate answer is. I think the easy solution is for them to just put Neum in, but I think that comes with its own set of risks
Yeah.
too, in terms of getting a rookie in there playing with 3 world champion all-star players, and how he gels with them, because then if that doesn't work, you're right back at square one too. But obviously if it does work, then you're back on top of Everest. So it's definitely, it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate this. I have a feeling based on how things have gone so far this season that they aren't going to be super urgent in terms of making a move here, or super aggressive. But I've been wrong about that before, and if we hear tomorrow that Neum is in the starting lineup, I guess we'll have more to talk about on the next episode.
I mean, it's not too dissimilar to what we saw with OpTic last year. With obviously it was the different circumstances of how it happened, but
Yeah.
Pred goes out of the lineup and Hoot comes in. They're still not very good, OpTic, and then Pred comes back in, replaces Hook. They're still not very good. They make another change, and Skies comes into the team, and I think that might be, and not saying like Neum has like no future or whatever, and like he's gonna be like a skies like OpTic skies level talent or whatever, but I felt like it was just I could not blame Skies for the issues that OpTic was going through, because it's like he should not be the guy that is relied on in turning around this team. And I feel the same way for Neum. Like, he should not be the guy as a rookie who's never played in the CDL. He should not be relied upon to be like the savior of the Los Angeles Thieves. That should be incumbent on like the defending MVP and the former champs and champs winner and MVP in Hydra, or like the former MVP candidate in Abizi. Like, there's just so many other people in this roster that should be like the guy leading this turnaround for LAT. And I should say that the turnaround is not like crazy, because they're not 0-4, they're 2-2. They should, like, just based on the schedule, they should go 4-3 in these qualifiers. They should be in the winners bracket. They should have a chance to at least compete for championship Sunday for Major 1. But like, we've just seen these last two matches where they played Toronto and Paris, and they just did not look particularly competitive against those two teams. And you know, there's a lot of reasons to wonder, like, why do you not look competitive against those teams? And we'll see with OpTic next week, because they play OpTic in their only match of the week. It's the last match of the week, so people will be looking forward to it. Like, people will be waiting on it. And I said it on the last episode. I will say it here. They should not bench Kenny until after this match. If they get absolutely smoked by OpTic, that is the pitch perfect time to make the change, because then Neum can come in. He can get another week. He could get a week of practice with the team. They play on Saturday of the final week. They play Boston. Boston has beaten LAT in the past before a few times. Every time it's been like, what the hell happened? How did Boston beat LAT? But Boston is an inferior opponent. That is the perfect team to put Neum against in his debut. Then the following day on Sunday, they play Carolina. That match looked a lot easier on paper a week ago when I said this, but Carolina is still not one of the top 5 teams, in my opinion. Maybe in reality they are. We'll see what happens over the next 2 weeks. But from what I can tell, Carolina is still like a bottom 6 team, and LAT should win that match. Those are 2 winnable matches to bring Neum in against, or 2 opponents that they can beat, that he can play well against, that you guys can kind of learn and still win matches. So if they make the change, I say wait till OpTic and let that go. It might be Kenny's last professional match, in all honesty, which is, you know, a crazy thing to say, but he's been on 3, like, this is his 3rd team in less than a year. And he was dropped from OpTic. I think Minnesota, like, if they could have kept him, they probably would have. Just personally, just thinking that. But he still didn't play great with Minnesota. And then LAT now, where I just think, like, it's just so much happening that I think we're coming to the natural conclusion. That we're coming to the place that I thought we were going to get to eventually, just a lot sooner. I did not expect it to be like within the first major qualifiers where like they're replacing Kenny, but this was I would say a flawed roster change just from the get-go, and part of that is the ghosty element of it, and that just doesn't look like a very good change now that we're removed and we see how good Paris is and how good ghosty is and how kind of inconsistent LAT is. But yeah, this is just a really messed up situation, and this is the 2nd year in a row this has happened, because you remember with OpTic last year, there was a lot of people saying like, well, you can't drop Kenny. Like, Kenny is the world champion, and like, he's like the heart and soul of this team. Like, this is the defending world championship team. And obviously Kenny has a ton of history with LAT and the 100 Thieves organization. So like, there's a lot playing into this, and I don't think it is an easy decision from like the personal aspect of it and like this kind of nostalgia. But if we're just thinking about it critically and thinking about it from a logic standpoint, the conclusion is clear that he's going to need to be replaced, like you said, probably sooner rather than later, because if you let this fester, who knows what's going to happen with this team. Like, who knows if you can alienate Scrap and or Hydra and or Abizi if this just continues to linger and they are not competitive with how expensive and how championship driven this team is. That is just like a recipe for disaster, and I don't think that's really what they want at LAT. Eric Rand said LAT shouldn't do anything until after Major 1. And then Jay Hearn said, why would they wait to be disappointed until Major 1 when they can improve now? I think there are definitely you can have the opinion that they should wait until Major 1. The reason I said bring Neum in starting with the final week of qualifiers, which I'm typically not a fan of. We talked about this before. Carolina did that with what was that?
Dylan Rex.
Yeah, Dylan Rex. He comes in. I think they have one qualifier match, and then they get absolutely rolled by LAT, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was LAT in the qualifier, and then LAT first round of the tourney. Too.
And it's just like, that's a horrible situation. The only reason I say this now for Neum is he doesn't have to play against OpTic, but he gets 2 online matches against inferior opponents to play against. He gets at least a week of practice, and then they get whatever practice they can before Major 1, typically not a lot because of the travel, and then they play Major 1. I just think and then you get the practice before Major 2 qualifiers, so he just gets more practice in that. You really have to be strategic in my mind about it, because there's so many reasons that this will go wrong for them. Especially, I will say, I'm a little more concerned now because the Neum stuff that, he did not work out with Carolina, and that it was a much better fit for Exceed. Granted, those are all rumors and kind of just hearsay because you don't really know what's exactly going on. That does make me think if Carolina's we want Exceed over Neum, that does not give me a ton of confidence about LAT succeeding with Neum instead of Kenny necessarily.
That's not how that went down, if you or at least according to the reports, because the reports were that Neum was signed to Carolina, his end of the deal. OpTic hadn't signed its part of the deal, and that allowed Neum to go to LAT, and then Carolina was like, well, we trialed Exceed and Neum, and now Neum's not an option. We're going to go with Exceed. Yeah. Jay Hearn just
I shouldn't have said they wanted him, but that it was proven that it was working out better with Exceed in the trials or scrims or whatever, according to Civ.
Still not. Yeah, I'm not convinced on all that. I didn't get to. I honestly kind of forgot when we were talking about that at that time. But Temp saying Carolina went 28-1 in scrim records and stuff, he might have been gassing it a little bit, might have been over exaggerating it, and then Sib obviously saying oh, Carolina wasn't getting 100 points with Neum. I feel like there's a little bit of truth to this, but it's not the full truth, and maybe it's exaggerated a little bit in both instances. But we can't, at least based on everything we've heard from the reports and stuff, is Carolina wanted Neum.
Yeah.
That fell through and they went with Exceed. And obviously that's paid off for Carolina this week so far. And if they wanted Neum, based on how he's played early on, if Carolina wanted him and then LAT swoops in to get him as a sub, LAT has to at least have seen something from him to make that a viable option. So I don't know what's going to be the end result here, but I do agree with you that it's an if not when situation with Kenny right now. I definitely feel especially if they play OpTic next match, that would just be absolutely throwing the kid into the fire, and it would even be a weird situation because he's been playing you would assume he's scrimmed against OpTic because he's on the Huntsman and the OpTic Challengers team. So maybe that would even be a situation where OpTic would be no, we're not gonna let Neum actually go play against us in this weekend. That could be a little bit of a wrinkle in this as well. But I'm not sure how I feel about Neum getting thrown into the fire against OpTic. I'm not sure how I feel about him, even if the LAT lose to OpTic, then being in that situation you described where he gets a week and then going into the major. So it might just be after Major 1 situation. But again, we saw Clearly, this week, the theme of teams being proactive and making those changes, paying dividends very early, that has to at least be a lingering thought for LAT right now, and it could play a factor in what they decide to do for this coming week or the weeks to lead up to Major 1.
And last thing I'll say is the breaking point coaches poll you put in the notes. This was the pre-return of the Call of Duty League. So this is just based on like the first 2 weeks and obviously the break and the preseasons. Like the coaches do typically have like a good sense of who's actually good and who's not. I do think it's interesting though that in these power rankings they put LAT at 5, behind OpTic, Paris, FaZe, and Toronto in that order. So OpTic 1, Paris 2, FaZe 3, and Toronto 4. LAT 5. I think that's interesting. Like, granted, LAT, like, it didn't look very good against Paris, but they beat FaZe. They are obviously like former MVPs and former world champions. So I just thought it was interesting that they're in the 5th spot here.
And I just saw it on the timeline when you were just talking. Cod clipped on Twitter. There was a post Scump Watch Party segment today, clearly, where Scump and Methods are like ranking the teams. So this can go back to Jay Hearn's question earlier. Methods put FaZe number 1 right now, OpTic 2, Gentlemates 3, and Koi 4. Didn't put a team 5th, but you would assume he would also have put Thieves 5th, if not lower, potentially. But there were only 4 spots on like the screen that they had, so not sure exactly what that would mean for LAT in particular, but it definitely is interesting and something we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's also pretty notable that they put Falcons at 8 behind Miami and Boston. Um, I mean, I don't
I think
necessarily disagree, but I just thought like with the talent that they have, that the coaches really don't think too highly of the Falcons, and they had won 2 straight going into the break. So what? And they obviously won today, but like or this weekend. But I just thought it was interesting that they're 8th and not maybe 6th or 7th.
it's also, again, this was part of why I wasn't totally convinced by the exact 28-1 number for Royal
Mhm.
Ravens in scrims, because I feel like if they actually went 28-1 in scrims, they would have been a little bit higher than 10th. I don't know how much higher the coaches could have realistically put them though. But at the same time, 28-1 is 28-1, so I feel like they would have gotten a bit of a bump there. But maybe it's all just fugazi at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty big drop. If you look at the point standings, like it's pretty clear Optics number 1. It's pretty clear Paris is number 2. And then it gets a little tighter. FaZe, Toronto. There's only 5 points difference between Toronto and LAT. And then there's a 20-point difference between LAT and Miami. That kind of points to what we've been talking about where like there's 5 top teams. Miami, I thought would be in that top tier. They just have not shown up to that point, and obviously this is before they ended up losing earlier in the week. So like I think even now like that would be more clear. But then you have Miami, Boston, Riyadh Falcons, Minnesota, and then there's a huge drop, like 45 points for Minnesota, 26 points for Carolina. So to your point, if they thought that they were like a really strong team in scrims, there would at like even if they were 10th, they would be closer to 9th place like in the points than they are here, where they have 26 points. Then C9 has 22, only 1 point ahead of Vancouver, which I find very interesting because I think like typically people, at least in my opinion, like there's a pretty big gap between C9 and Vancouver, like just in general. So I don't know, like it's something to think about. I don't know actually how much it matters in the end. And again, like I said earlier, we'll be doing our power rankings after Major 1, some or before Major 2 qualifiers to kind of give us an idea of where things changed and how much they have changed over the last 6 to 7 weeks since the beginning of the CDL season. Anything else that you want to talk about before we get out of here?
I don't think so. We've been yapping for a good while now.
Yeah, so the pick'em to this point, you went 4-4 this week. I went 3-5. Of course, the only difference was that first match of the week. So you are 18-8 on the season, and I am 17-9. Trimmer still winless on the year, and we will be back sometime mid this week to talk about the second week of I guess the fourth week, but really the second week of 2026 in the CDL. Really getting back into the swing of things. We're pretty close to the major, which is very interesting, and I think there's going to be a lot of pretty. I mean, there are going to be some pretty critical matches this week, and certainly next week. There will be a ton of very critical matches for qualifying and the seeding that goes into Major 1. But we'll be back in a few days to talk about those matches and whatever news may come out of the next few days. Please like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, whether you're watching live or you're watching the videos. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, in the podcast Twitters at Ego Chall Podcast. And I think that about does it. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Preston shouted out the boys in the YouTube chat throughout the show, but just one final time, shout out Jay Hearn, Eric Rand, Los Cruz, Nate, and who is Ismail Sierra earlier. Shout out all you guys for showing love in the YouTube chat. Really do appreciate it. But yeah, this was definitely a banger first week of the 2026 actual calendar season of matches. Lots, obviously, yapped for almost 2 hours now. And, if you look at the predictions and stuff from last week heading into this week, it probably didn't appear like we were going to have so much to talk about. But I'm happy the way things played out in terms of giving us plenty to discuss and even more content. So things worked out pretty well. And can't wait to really dive into this season more. We're just getting started and it's already heating up. So looking forward to it. Appreciate all support, like we said. Really does mean a lot. And yeah, we'll be back at some point in the next couple days to get ready for the fourth week. And then before you know it, we'll be actually at major time and land Call of Duty again, returning for the first time in several months. So really looking forward to it. Can't wait. Hope you guys join us on this journey throughout the season and beyond. And yeah, see you guys very soon. Thank you as always. And remember to send the chow.